working on an oil rig, dangling above the sea. The harness slipped, plunging into the cold water below. Struggling to stay afloat in the heavy work clothes, a large black shape approached from the murky depths. Crew members shouted from above, helpless to intervene. The ocean's top predator had found an easy meal. Hello everyone, welcome to the channel. Before we begin the orca attack story, I want to ask for your support by subscribing to the channel. Your subscription is very important to us, so please subscribe, click the like button, and leave a comment telling us which city you're watching from. Now let's move on to the case. The wind howled across the Antarctic landscape, a relentless force that seemed to penetrate even the thickest layers of thermal gear. Dr. Emily Chen squinted against the biting cold as she stepped off the small cargo plane onto the ice-covered runway. Her breath formed thick clouds in the frigid air, and she could feel the chill seeping into her bones despite her state-of-the-art cold-weather gear. "Welcome to the edge of the world, Dr. Chen," a gruff voice called out over the roar of the plane's engines. Emily turned to see a bearded man in a heavy parka approaching her. He extended a gloved hand. "I'm Jack Hawkins, station manager. We've been expecting you and your team." Emily shook his hand firmly. "Pleasure to meet you, Mr. Hawkins. Thank you for having us. I hope we're not causing too much disruption to your normal operations." Jack chuckled, a sound almost lost in the howling wind. "Trust me, Doc, any disruption is welcome out here. Breaks up the monotony." He gestured towards a cluster of low buildings in the distance. "Let's get you and your team inside before you all freeze solid. We can handle the equipment transfer later." As they trudged towards the research station, Emily glanced back at her team disembarking from the plane. Dr. Alexei Volkov, her right-hand man and expert in marine mammal acoustics, was helping Dr. Sarah Nakamura, their marine biologist, with her bags. Behind them, Tom Richards, their tech specialist, was already fiddling with some piece of equipment, his bare hands exposed to the biting cold. "Tom," Emily called out, "gloves on. We haven't even started the research, and I can't have you losing fingers to frostbite." Tom looked up, startled, then grinned sheepishly as he quickly pulled his gloves back on. Emily shook her head, a mix of exasperation and fondness on her face. Her team was brilliant, but sometimes they needed reminding of the basics when caught up in their work. Once inside the main building of the research station, the team began to thaw out. The interior was utilitarian but warm, with the hum of heaters providing a constant background noise. Jack led them to a conference room where maps and charts covered the walls. "All right, folks," Jack said, his tone becoming more serious. "I know you're all eager to get started, but we need to go over some ground rules first. The Antarctic is not forgiving of mistakes." For the next hour, Jack briefed them on safety protocols, emergency procedures, and the layout of the station. Emily listened intently, occasionally asking questions or adding comments based on her previous polar expeditions. As Jack wrapped up, Emily stood to address her team. "I know we're all excited to begin our work," she said, her eyes bright with anticipation. "This is an unprecedented opportunity to study orca behavior in one of the most extreme environments on Earth. But remember, our safety comes first. We're guests here, both of this station and of the Antarctic itself. We respect both, understood?" Her team nodded in agreement, their faces a mix of excitement and determination. "Good," Emily continued. "Now let's get our equipment set up. We'll do a final check of the Aurora tomorrow morning before we head out." The next few hours were a flurry of activity as the team unpacked and set up their specialized equipment. The conference room was transformed into a high-tech command center, with monitors displaying sonar readings, thermal imaging, and various other data streams. As evening approached, Emily found herself alone in the room, double-checking the connections on their main computer system. The soft glow of the screens illuminated her face as she worked, her brow furrowed in concentration. "You should rest, Dr. Chen," a soft voice said from the doorway. Emily looked up to see Sarah standing there holding 2 steaming mugs. "You've been at it for hours." Emily smiled gratefully as she accepted one of the mugs. The rich aroma of coffee filled her nostrils, a small luxury in this remote outpost. "Thanks, Sarah. I just want to make sure everything's perfect for tomorrow." Sarah settled into a chair next to her, blowing gently on her own coffee. "It will be. We've prepared for this for months, but we need you at your best when we're out. There on the ice. Emily nodded, taking a sip of her coffee. You're right, of course, it's just, do you ever feel like we're on the verge of something big? Something that could change everything we think we know? Sarah's eyes sparkled with understanding. Every time we come to a place like this, that's why we do what we do, isn't it? To push the boundaries of our knowledge? Exactly, Emily said, a note of passion creeping into her voice. The orcas here, they're different. The vocalizations we've picked up in our preliminary studies, the hunting patterns, it's like they've evolved strategies specifically for this environment that we've never seen before. And tomorrow we'll be out there seeing it firsthand, Sarah added, her own excitement evident. A comfortable silence fell between them as they sipped their coffee, each lost in their own thoughts about the expedition ahead. The quiet was suddenly broken by a burst of laughter from down the hall, followed by Alexei's accented voice raised in protest. Sounds like Tom and Alexei are at it again, Sarah chuckled. Emily shook her head, amused. I swear, those two bicker like an old married couple. Come on, let's go make sure they're not breaking anything important. As they walked down the hallway, the station creaked and groaned around them, the structure settling in the intense cold outside. Emily paused for a moment, placing her hand against the wall and feeling the vibrations of the building straining against the elements. Everything all right? Sarah asked, noticing her hesitation. Emily nodded, dropping her hand. Yes, just taking it all in. Tomorrow we'll be out there, surrounded by nothing but ice and sea. It's humbling, isn't it? To be in a place where we're so clearly not the dominant species. Sarah's expression grew serious. It is. Do you think we're ready for what we might find? Emily met her gaze, determination glinting in her eyes. Ready or not, we're here to uncover the truth. Whatever these orcas have to show us, we'll face it head on. With that, they continued down the hall, the sounds of their teammates' friendly argument growing louder. As they entered the room, Emily took in the scene, Tom gesticulating wildly as he tried to explain some technical point, Alexei shaking his head in mock exasperation, and Jack watching it all with amused tolerance. This was her team, her family for the duration of this expedition. Together they would venture out onto the ice tomorrow, into a world few humans had ever truly experienced. The thought sent a shiver of anticipation down Emily's spine, as she joined in the conversation, laughing at Tom's terrible attempt at a Russian accent. Emily couldn't shake the feeling that tomorrow would bring something none of them were prepared for. The orcas were out there, hidden beneath the ice, waiting. And soon, very soon, they would come face to face with one of nature's most intelligent and deadly predators in its own unforgiving domain. The night wore on, filled with final preparations, shared meals, and the nervous energy that always preceded a major expedition. As Emily finally retired to her small, Spartanly furnished room, she found sleep elusive. Her mind raced with possibilities, both thrilling and terrifying. The last thing she remembered before drifting off was the distant sound of ice cracking, a sharp report in the Antarctic night that seemed to herald the challenges that lay ahead. The pale Antarctic sun crept over the horizon, casting a ghostly light across the frozen landscape. Dr. Emily Chen stood on the deck of the Aurora, her breath forming misty clouds in the frigid air. The icebreaker cut through the pack ice with a rhythmic crunching sound, the only noise breaking the eerie silence of the polar morning. Dr. Chen, Alexei's voice crackled over her radio. You might want to come to the bridge. We're picking up some unusual readings. Emily frowned, her scientific curiosity immediately piqued. On my way, she replied, giving one last glance at the vast expanse of white before heading inside. The bridge was a hive of activity when she arrived. Tom hunched over a computer terminal, his fingers flying across the keyboard as he analyzed incoming data. Sarah peered through high-powered binoculars scanning the horizon, while Alexei adjusted settings on their acoustic equipment. What have we got? Emily asked, moving to stand behind Tom. He glanced up at her, excitement evident in his eyes. It's the strangest thing, Doc. We're picking up vocalizations unlike anything in our database. The frequency patterns, the modulations, it's Orca, but it's like nothing we've ever recorded before. Emily leaned in, studying the waveforms on the screen. Her brow furrowed as she tried to make sense of the complex patterns. Could it be a pod we haven't encountered before? Maybe a regional dialect we haven't documented? Alexei shook his head, joining them at the terminal. No, this is more than that. Look at these low-frequency components. They're well below what we typically associate with orca vocalizations. It's almost as if they're using the ice as a resonating chamber. Emily finished, her voice barely above a whisper. Incredible. They could be communicating over vast distances using the ice sheet itself. Sarah lowered her binoculars, turning to face the group. That's not all. I've spotted a pod about 2 kilometers out. Their behavior is odd. Odd how? Emily asked, moving to join Sarah at the window. Sarah handed her the binoculars. See for yourself. They're moving in a highly coordinated pattern I've never observed before. It's almost military in its precision. Emily raised the binoculars to her eyes, focusing on the area Sarah indicated. Through the lenses, she could make out the distinctive, black and white forms of orcas surfacing in the distance. As she watched, a chill ran down her spine that had nothing to do with the outside temperature. The orcas moved with an unnatural synchronicity, their dorsal fins cutting through the water in perfect formation. They seemed to be circling something, though from this distance, Emily couldn't make out what it might be. Tom, she said, not taking her eyes off the pod. Can you get us closer? I want a better look at what they're doing. You got it, Doc, Tom replied, already moving to adjust their course. As the Aurora drew nearer to the pod, the atmosphere on the bridge grew tense. The strange vocalizations grew louder, filling the air with an otherworldly chorus that set everyone's nerves on edge. My God, Sarah breathed, her eyes wide as she stared out the window. Are they herding seals? Emily focused her binoculars on the center of the orca's circle. To her astonishment, she saw a group of Weddell seals huddled on a small ice floe, looking terrified. This isn't normal hunting behavior, Alexei said, his voice tight with concern. Orcas don't usually corral prey like this, especially not in such large numbers. Emily was about to respond when a massive form suddenly breached the water near the ship. The orca's enormous body hung in the air for a moment, water cascading off its sleek form, before it crashed back into the sea with a thunderous splash. The impact sent waves rocking the Aurora, causing everyone to grab onto something for stability. Jesus! Tom exclaimed, his face pale. That one must be at least 30 feet long. Emily's mind raced as she tried to process what she was seeing. Orcas of that size were exceedingly rare, and the coordinated behavior of the pod defied everything she thought she knew about these animals. Everyone, start recording, she ordered, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. Video, audio, thermal imaging. I want everything. We're witnessing something unprecedented here. The team sprang into action, each member focusing on their specialized equipment. Emily continued to observe through the binoculars, her scientific mind cataloging every detail of the orca's behavior. The pod had tightened their circle around the trapped seals, their movements becoming more agitated. Suddenly, without warning, 3 of the largest orcas surged forward in perfect unison. They slammed into the ice floe, shattering it and sending the seals tumbling into the frigid water. What followed was a frenzy of activity that left even the seasoned researchers shocked. The orcas worked together with a level of coordination Emily had never seen before, herding and separating the seals with ruthless efficiency. Within minutes, the water was stained red, and the pod began to disperse. Did you get all that? Emily asked, her voice hoarse. Tom nodded, his face ashen. Every second. Doc, what the hell did we just witness? Before Emily could answer, a deep, reverberating call echoed through the ship. It was so powerful that they could feel it vibrating in their chests. As one, the team rushed to the windows. The massive orca that had breached earlier was floating at the surface, its eye clearly visible as it seemed to stare directly at the Aurora. For a moment that felt like an eternity, Emily found herself locked in a gaze with one of the most intelligent predators on the planet. She had the unsettling feeling that she was being assessed, measured. Then, with a flick of its enormous tail, The orca disappeared beneath the surface. The rest of the pod followed, vanishing into the depths as quickly as they had appeared. A heavy silence fell over the bridge, broken only by the soft beeping of their equipment. Emily realized she had been holding her breath and exhaled slowly. "Alexei," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Tell me you got a recording of that last call." He nodded, still staring out at the now empty sea. "Crystal clear, Emily. I've never heard anything like it. The power, the complexity. It was like it was trying to tell us something." Sarah turned from the window, her face a mix of awe and concern. "Emily, what are we dealing with here? This goes beyond any documented orca behavior. It's almost like they've developed some kind of swarm intelligence." Emily finished, her mind racing with the implications. "A collective consciousness that allows them to act as a single, highly efficient unit." Tom let out a nervous laugh. "Great. So we've stumbled upon a pod of super-intelligent killer whales. What's next? Are they going to start spelling out messages to us in Morse code?" Emily shot him a sharp look. "This is serious, Tom. If what we've just witnessed is indicative of a broader evolutionary trend in Antarctic orcas, it could revolutionize our understanding of cetacean intelligence and social structures." She turned to address the entire team. "I want a full analysis of all the data we've collected. Alexei, focus on those vocalizations. See if you can isolate any patterns or recurring elements. Sarah, I need a detailed breakdown of their hunting strategy compared to known orca de terre behaviors. Tom, run our footage through every analysis tool we have. Look for any anomalies in their physical characteristics or movements." As the team set to work, Emily stepped back to the window, her eyes scanning the horizon. The sea was calm now, showing no sign of the incredible display they had just witnessed. But beneath that placid surface, she knew something extraordinary was happening. A mixture of excitement and unease settled in her stomach. They had come to the Antarctic hoping to expand their knowledge of orca behavior. Now, it seemed, they had stumbled upon something that could change everything they thought they knew about these magnificent creatures. As she stared out at the vast icy expanse, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that the orca's display hadn't just been a hunt. It had been a message. And somehow she knew that this was only the beginning. The Aurora's hull groaned under the pressure of the surrounding ice, a constant reminder of the hostile environment beyond its metal walls. Dr. Emily Chen stood in the ship's laboratory, her eyes fixed on the screens displaying the data they'd collected over the past few days. The more she analyzed, the more perplexed she became. "Alexei, come look at this," she called out, gesturing to her colleague. Dr. Alexei Volkov approached, his brow furrowed in concentration. "These vocalization patterns, they're evolving." Alexei leaned in, studying the complex waveforms on the screen. "Incredible," he murmured. "It's as if they're developing a new language in real time. But how is that possible?" Before Emily could respond, the ship suddenly lurched violently, sending both scientists stumbling. Alarms blared throughout the vessel. "What the hell was that?" Emily shouted, steadying herself against a desk. The intercom crackled to life, Tom's voice filled with panic. "Dr. Chen, bridge, now, we're under attack." Emily and Alexei exchanged a look of disbelief before racing out of the lab. As they ran through the corridors, the ship rocked again, more violently this time. The lights flickered ominously. They burst onto the bridge to find chaos. Tom was frantically working the ship's controls, while Sarah stared out the window, her face pale with shock. "Report," Emily demanded, moving to the front of the bridge. Tom's voice was strained as he responded. "It's the orcas, Doc. They're ramming the ship. I've never seen anything like it." Emily joined Sarah at the window, and her breath caught in her throat. A pod of orcas, larger than any she'd ever seen, surrounded the Aurora. As she watched, one of the massive creatures breached the surface and slammed into the side of the ship with incredible force. "This is impossible," Sarah whispered, her voice trembling. "Orcas don't attack ships. It goes against everything we know about their behavior." Another impact rocked the vessel. The sound of twisting metal echoed through the ship, sending a chill down Emily's spine. "Tom, get us out of here," she ordered. Tom's hands flew over the controls. "I'm trying, Doc, but they've got us surrounded. The ice is too thick to break through quickly." Alexei's voice cut through the tension. Emily, look at this. He pointed to a sonar display. They're not just attacking randomly. This is a coordinated assault. They're targeting our weakest points. Emily stared at the screen, her mind racing. The orcas moved with a level of strategy that defied belief, working in perfect sync to systematically weaken the Aurora's hull. How is this possible? She muttered, more to herself than anyone else. It's as if they understand the ship's structure. Another violent impact sent a shudder through the vessel. This time the lights went out completely, plunging the bridge into darkness. Emergency power kicked in moments later, bathing everything in an eerie red glow. Hull breach in the lower deck, Tom shouted, his eyes wide with fear. We're taking on water. Emily's training kicked in, overriding her shock. Alexei, Sarah, get to the emergency rafts, make sure they're ready to deploy. Tom, send out a distress signal and keep trying to break us free. As her team rushed to follow her orders, Emily turned back to the window. The water around the ship was churning violently, dorsal fins slicing through the waves like knives. A massive orca breached right in front of her, its eyes seeming to lock onto hers for a moment before it crashed back into the sea. The ship groaned ominously, listing to one side. Emily grabbed the radio, her voice steady despite the fear gripping her heart. Mayday, Mayday. This is the research vessel Aurora. We are under attack by a pod of orcas approximately 200 nautical miles off the Antarctic coast, hull breach reported. Requesting immediate assistance. Only static answered her call. Tom's voice was grim. The radio's dead, Doc. They must have damaged the antenna. Another impact, even more violent than before. The sound of rushing water grew louder. Abandon ship, Emily yelled, her voice carrying through the intercom. Everyone to the emergency. Rafts now. The next few minutes were a blur of activity. Emily helped her team and the ship's crew into the inflatable rafts, ensuring everyone had survival suits and emergency beacons. As the last raft was deployed, she took one final look at the Aurora. The ship was listing heavily now, its once proud frame battered and broken. With a heavy heart, Emily jumped into the final raft. As they drifted away from the sinking vessel, the attack suddenly ceased. The orcas withdrew, disappearing beneath the waves as quickly as they had appeared. In the eerie silence that followed, the survivors huddled together in their rafts, watching as the Aurora slipped beneath the icy waters. Emily's mind raced, trying to make sense of what they had just experienced. Dr. Chen, Sarah's voice was barely above a whisper. What do we do now? Emily turned to face her team, seeing the fear and confusion in their eyes. She took a deep breath, steeling herself. We survive, and we figure out what the hell just happened. As if in response to her words, a deep, haunting call echoed across the water. The survivors froze, their eyes scanning the horizon. In the distance, a massive dorsal fin broke the surface before slowly sinking back into the depths. They're still out there, Alexei murmured, his voice tight with tension. Emily nodded grimly. And something tells me they're not done with us yet. The rafts drifted in the frigid waters, surrounded by broken ice and debris from the Aurora. The sun hung low on the horizon, casting long shadows across the desolate seascape. Emily knew their chances of survival were slim. The cold, the lack of supplies, the ever-present threat of the orcas. Everything was stacked against them. Yet, as she looked at the determined faces of her team, she felt a glimmer of hope. They were scientists, explorers. They had ventured into one of the most inhospitable environments on Earth in search of knowledge. Now they faced a mystery beyond anything they could have imagined. Listen to me, Emily said, her voice carrying across the small gap between the rafts. What we've witnessed here is unprecedented. Those orcas displayed a level of intelligence and coordination that goes beyond anything in scientific record. We may be in danger, but we're also on the cusp of a discovery that could change our understanding of cetacean intelligence forever. Tom let out a bitter laugh. Great. We'll have one hell of a paper to write, if we survive. Emily fixed him with a stern look. We will survive. We're going to document everything we can remember about the attack. Every detail, no matter how small, could be crucial. And when rescue comes, and it will come, We'll have a story that will shake the scientific community to its core." As her team began to recount their observations, Emily turned her gaze back to the sea. The water was calm now, belying the violence they had just witnessed. But she knew the orcas were out there, watching, waiting. A shiver ran down her spine that had nothing to do with the cold. They had come to the Antarctic to study the orcas, but now Emily realized they had become the subjects of a far more dangerous experiment. The hunters had become the hunted, and the true test of survival was just beginning. As the long Antarctic night began to fall, casting the world in shades of deep blue and purple, Emily Chen steeled herself for the challenges ahead. Whatever the orca's purpose, whatever strange evolution had led to this unprecedented behavior, she was determined to uncover the truth, even if it meant risking everything in the process. The rafts drifted on the dark waters, tiny specks of life in the vast, unforgiving wilderness of ice and sea. And somewhere in the depths below, Emily knew the orcas were watching, their intentions as mysterious and dangerous as the frozen world around them. The frigid Antarctic wind howled across the ice, cutting through the thermal gear of the survivors huddled in their life rafts. Dr. Emily Chen's teeth chattered as she scanned the horizon, searching for any sign of rescue. Hours had passed since the Aurora sank beneath the icy waters, and the gravity of their situation was settling in like a lead weight. Dr. Chen?" Sarah's voice quavered, her lips blue from the cold. "How long do you think we can last out here?" Emily turned to her colleague, forcing a reassuring smile despite the fear gnawing at her insides. "Our survival suits will protect us from hypothermia for a while. As long as we stay together and keep our spirits up, we have a good chance." Tom let out a bitter laugh from the adjacent raft. "A good chance? We're stranded in the middle of the Antarctic Ocean with a pod of killer whales that seem hell-bent on destroying us. I'd say our chances are pretty damn slim." "Enough, Tom," Alexei snapped, his normally calm demeanor frayed by stress. "Negativity won't help us survive this." Emily was about to intervene when a low, haunting sound reverberated through the water. Everyone fell silent, their eyes wide with fear. "They're back," whispered Sarah, her voice barely audible over the wind. The surface of the water began to churn about 50 meters from their position. Sleek black dorsal fins sliced through the waves, circling their small flotilla of rafts. Emily counted at least a dozen orcas, their movements synchronized with an unnerving precision. "Everyone stay calm," Emily ordered, trying to keep her own voice steady. "Don't make any sudden movements." The orcas continued their eerie patrol, neither approaching nor retreating. It was as if they were studying, the survivors assessing them. Emily's scientific mind raced, trying to make sense of their behavior. Suddenly, the largest orca, the one Emily recognized as the leader from the attack on the Aurora, breached the surface. It hung in the air for a moment, its massive body blocking out the weak Antarctic sun, before crashing back into the sea. The impact sent a wave surging towards the rafts. "Hold on!" Emily shouted as the wave hit them. The rafts bucked and heaved, nearly capsizing. Water sloshed over the sides, soaking the already freezing survivors. As they struggled to bail out the icy water, Emily noticed something strange. The orcas had changed their formation. They now formed a perfect circle around the rafts, their dorsal fins lined up with an unnatural symmetry. "What are they doing?" Tom asked, his earlier cynicism replaced by awe and fear. Before anyone could respond, a low-frequency hum filled the air. It started softly, but quickly grew in intensity, until Emily could feel it vibrating in her chest. The sound seemed to be coming from the orcas, but it was like no vocalization she had ever heard before. "Alexei," she called out, "are you getting this?" The acoustics expert nodded, his face a mask of concentration as he fiddled with a waterproof recorder he had managed to save from the ship. "It's incredible," he muttered. "The harmonics, the modulation. It's almost like..." His words were cut off as the humming suddenly stopped. In the silence that followed, Emily felt a prickling sensation at the base of her skull. She blinked, trying to clear her vision as the world seemed to shimmer around her. "Does anyone else feel that?" Sarah asked, her voice sounding distant and echoed. Emily tried to respond, but her tongue felt thick in her mouth. Her thoughts became sluggish, as if she were thinking through molasses. She vaguely registered the concerned voices of her teammates, but they seemed to be coming from very far away. Then, as suddenly as it began, the sensation stopped. Emily gasped, her mind clearing like a fog lifting. She looked around wildly, checking on her team. They all wore expressions of confusion and disorientation. What just happened?" Tom stammered. Emily shook her head, trying to collect her thoughts. "I'm not sure. It felt like some kind of psychic event." "That's impossible," Alexei interjected, but his voice lacked conviction. "Is it?" Emily challenged. "We've just witnessed orcas displaying levels of intelligence and coordination that defy everything we know about them. At this point, I'm not sure what's impossible anymore." As if to underscore her words, the orcas suddenly dove beneath the surface in perfect unison. The water became eerily still. "Where did they go?" Sarah asked, peering over the edge of the raft. Emily was about to caution her to be careful when she noticed something in the water. At first, she thought it was a trick of the light, but as she focused, she realized what she was seeing. "Look," she breathed, pointing at the water. Beneath the surface, visible through the clear Antarctic water, the orcas had formed a complex three-dimensional pattern. They hung motionless in the water, their bodies arranged in what looked like a giant, living DNA helix. "My God," Alexei whispered. "It's a message." Emily nodded, her mind racing. "But what does it mean? Are they trying to communicate with us?" Before anyone could speculate further, the orcas broke formation. They streaked away from the rafts at incredible speed, disappearing into the depths. In the silence that followed, the survivors looked at each other, a mix of fear, awe, and confusion on their faces. "Dr. Chen," Sarah said hesitantly, "what do we do now?" Emily took a deep breath, trying to process everything they had just witnessed. "We document everything, every detail, every observation. When we get out of this, the scientific community needs to know what happened here." As they began to recount their experiences, Emily's mind whirled with possibilities. The orcas' behavior defied all known patterns. Their level of coordination, the complex vocalizations, the apparent attempt at communication, it all pointed to a leap in cetacean evolution that was nothing short of revolutionary. But with that excitement came a deep sense of unease. If the orcas had indeed evolved to this level of intelligence, what were their intentions? The attack on the Aurora suggested hostility, but this display seemed almost educational. As the long Antarctic day began to wane, casting the ice in shades of pink and gold, Emily realized that they were no longer just fighting for survival. They had become unwilling participants in a pivotal moment in the history of interspecies communication. The rafts drifted on the current, 5 tiny specks of humanity in the vast, unforgiving Antarctic wilderness. And somewhere in the depths below, Emily knew, the orcas were watching, waiting. Their next move would determine not just the fate of the survivors, but potentially the future of human-cetacean relations. As darkness fell and the temperature plummeted further, Emily huddled closer to her teammates. They had survived the initial attack, but she knew their ordeal was far from over. Whatever the orcas' intentions, whatever strange evolution had led to this unprecedented behavior, she was determined to uncover the truth, even if it meant risking everything in the process. The pale Antarctic sun crept over the horizon, casting a weak light over the desolate seascape. Dr. Emily Chen blinked awake, her body stiff and aching from a night spent huddled in the life raft. For a moment, disorientation clouded her mind before the harsh reality of their situation came crashing back. "Status report," she croaked, her voice hoarse from the cold and lack of water. Around her, her team stirred. Sarah, her face pale and drawn, checked the emergency beacon. Still transmitting, but no response yet. Tom, his usual sarcasm subdued by exhaustion, peered over the edge of the raft. "Water's calm. No sign of our friends." Alexei, who had been keeping watch, shook his head. "They're out there. I can feel it." Emily nodded, understanding the sentiment. Even without visual confirmation, there was a palpable sense of being watched, of being studied. The orca's presence, though unseen, was unmistakable. "We need to make a decision," Emily said, her voice stronger now as she slipped back into her role as leader. "We can't just drift and hope for rescue. We need a plan." Sarah pointed to a distant white mass on the horizon. "There's an ice shelf about 2 kilometers east. If we can reach it, we'd at least have solid ground under our feet and be sitting ducks for the orcas," Tom muttered. Emily considered their options. Staying put meant eventual death from exposure or dehydration. Moving towards the ice shelf was risky, but it offered a chance, however slim. "We make for the ice," she decided. "Tom, Sarah, you'll paddle. Alexei and I will keep watch for any orca activity." As they began their slow journey, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that they were being herded. The water remained eerily calm, with no sign of the massive predators that had destroyed their ship. Yet every instinct screamed that they were there, just below the surface, watching and waiting. They had covered perhaps half the distance to the ice shelf when Alexei suddenly stiffened. "Listen," he whispered. At first, Emily heard nothing but the soft splash of the paddles. Then gradually a low humming filled the air. It was similar to the sound they'd heard before, but different somehow. More complex, with layers of harmonics that seemed to resonate in her very bones. "It's beautiful," Sarah murmured, her strokes slowing as she listened. "Keep paddling," Emily ordered, fighting against the strange lethargy that threatened to overtake her. "We can't afford to stop." The humming grew louder, surrounding them. The water began to ripple and churn. Dark shapes moved beneath the surface, circling their small rafts. "They're hurting us," Tom said, his voice tight with fear, "driving us towards the ice." Emily knew he was right. The orca's movements were too precise, too coordinated to be anything but intentional. "Keep going," she said. "Whatever they want. Our best chance is on solid ground." As they neared the edge of the ice shelf, the orca's behavior changed. They began to surface, their massive bodies breaching the water in a display of power that sent sprays of icy water over the rafts. "My God," Alexei breathed. "Look at their eyes." Emily looked and felt a chill that had nothing to do with the Antarctic cold. The orca's eyes were different, more expressive, almost human in their intelligence. As one particularly large orca passed close to their raft, Emily found herself locked in its gaze. In that moment, she felt a connection, a sense of vast intelligence and purpose that left her breathless. The moment was shattered by Tom's shout. "Incoming!" A massive wave, generated by the synchronized diving of multiple orcas, bore down on them. Emily had just enough time to yell, "Hold on," before it hit. The world became a chaos of water and ice. Emily felt herself torn from the raft, plunged into the frigid Antarctic Sea. The cold was shocking, driving the air from her lungs. She flailed, trying to orient herself to find the surface. Just as panic began to set in, she felt something solid beneath her. For a horrifying moment, she thought one of the orcas had her. Then she realized she was being pushed upward, breaching the surface with a gasp. Coughing and sputtering, Emily found herself on a smooth, solid surface. As her vision cleared, she realized she was lying on the back of one of the orcas. Around her, she saw her team in similar positions, each supported by one of the massive creatures. Is everyone okay?" She managed to call out between chattering teeth. A chorus of shaky affirmatives answered her. Before they could say more, the orcas began to move, swimming in perfect formation towards the ice shelf. "What's happening?" Sarah asked, her voice trembling with cold and fear. Emily shook her head, at a loss for words. Everything they were experiencing defied scientific explanation. These orcas weren't just displaying unprecedented intelligence. They were exhibiting a level of interspecies cooperation that should have been impossible. As they neared the ice shelf, Emily braced herself, unsure of what would happen next. To her amazement, the orcas gently maneuvered to deposit each of them onto the ice before retreating a short distance. Shivering violently, the team huddled, together on the ice, watching as the orcas formed a semicircle around them. The largest of the pod, the one Emily had come to think of as the leader, moved to the center. What happened next would be seared into Emily's memory for the rest of her life. The orca opened its mouth and emitted a series of clicks, whistles, and deep resonant tones. But layered within those sounds, barely perceptible yet undeniably there, were words. "Welcome, survivors," the orca seemed to say, the sounds distorted yet recognizable. "We have much to discuss." Emily felt her knees go weak, only Alexei's supporting arm keeping her upright. "This is impossible," she whispered. "After everything we've seen," Tom said, his voice a mix of awe and hysteria. "You're still using that word?" The orca continued, each word a struggle yet clear in its intent. "Your kind destroys, pollutes. We evolve, adapt, to survive." "They've developed a way to mimic human speech," Alexei murmured, his scientific curiosity overriding his fear. "The complexity of vocal structures required for this. It's extraordinary." "Why?" Emily called out, finding her voice at last. "Why attack our ship? Why bring us here?" The orca was silent for a long moment, as if considering its response. Then, "Warning. Example. Your kind must learn or perish." With those ominous words, the orca submerged. One by one, the others followed until the water was still once more. The survivors stood in stunned silence, the implications of what they had just witnessed slowly sinking in. They had not just discovered a new level of orca intelligence. They had made first contact with a species that had evolved to challenge humanity's dominance. "What do we do now?" Sarah asked, her voice small in the vast Antarctic emptiness. Emily took a deep breath, her scientific mind already racing with the ramifications of their discovery. "We survive," she said firmly. "We find a way off this ice, and then we tell the world what we've learned here." As if in response to her words, a distant hum filled the air. At first, Emily thought it was the orcas returning. Then she recognized the sound. "Helicopters. Rescue," Tom breathed, a hint of his old sarcasm returning. "Took them long enough." As the helicopters grew closer, Emily turned to her team. "Remember," she said urgently, "everything we've seen, everything we've heard. The world needs to know. The future of our relationship with the oceans depends on it." The wind whipped up as the rescue choppers neared, drowning out any response. But Emily saw the determination in her team's eyes. They had survived an extraordinary encounter, and now they carried a message that could change the world. As Emily helped her team into the rescue harnesses, she cast one last look at the seemingly peaceful water. Somewhere out there, the orcas were watching, waiting. She shivered, knowing that this was just the beginning of a new chapter in the history of life on Earth. The helicopters lifted off, carrying the survivors away from the ice shelf. But as they rose into the pale Antarctic sky, Emily knew that a part of her would always remain here, forever changed by the encounter with a species that had evolved to challenge humanity's place in the world. The steady beep of medical equipment filled the small hospital room in Punta Arenas, Chile. Dr. Emily Chen sat upright in her bed, her eyes fixed on the television mounted on the wall. The news anchor's voice droned on, recounting the miraculous rescue of the Aurora's crew. In what authorities are calling an unprecedented event, the research vessel Aurora was destroyed by what survivors claim was a coordinated attack by a pod of orcas. While experts remain skeptical of these claims, the Chilean Navy confirms that the ship did indeed sink in Antarctic waters. Emily clicked off the TV, frustration etched on her face. She turned to her team, gathered in the room for their daily meeting. Sarah sat in a chair by the window, her arm in a sling. Tom paced restlessly at the foot of the bed, while Alexei leaned against the wall, his usual calm demeanor strained. "They don't believe us," Emily said, her voice tight. "Not really. They're humoring us, but you can see it in their eyes. They think we've lost our minds." Tom let out a bitter laugh. "Can you blame them? If I hadn't lived through it, I wouldn't believe it either. Talking orcas? Sounds like a bad sci-fi movie. But we have proof," Sarah interjected, gesturing to the waterproof camera she'd managed to save during their ordeal. "The footage, the recordings." Alexei shook his head. "It's not enough. The video is shaky, the audio distorted. Without context, it could be dismissed as a hoax or misinterpreted data." Emily sighed, running a hand through her tangled hair. "We need more. We need to go back." The room fell silent, the weight of her words hanging in the air. It was Tom who finally broke the silence, his voice uncharacteristically serious. "Doc, are you out of your mind? We barely survived the first encounter. Going back would be suicide." Emily leaned forward, her eyes blazing with determination. "Don't you see? This is bigger than us. We've made first contact with a species that's evolved to challenge our dominance. The implications for science, for our understanding of intelligence, for the future of our planet. We can't just let this go." Sarah nodded slowly, a spark of excitement breaking through her exhaustion. "Emily's right. We have a responsibility to pursue this. But how? Our funding is gone. The Aurora is at the bottom of the ocean, and I doubt any research institution is going to bankroll another expedition based on our current evidence." A knock at the door interrupted their discussion. A nurse entered, followed by a tall, distinguished-looking man in a crisp suit. "Dr. Chen?" the man said, his accent marking him as American. "I'm Dr. James Harrison from the Oceanic Research Institute. I was hoping we could talk." Emily exchanged glances with her team, before nodding cautiously. "Of course, Dr. Harrison, please come in." As the nurse left, closing the door behind her, Harrison took a seat near the bed. His eyes scanned the room, taking in the battered appearance of the research team. "I'll cut to the chase," he said, his tone businesslike. "I've read your preliminary report. Watched the footage you salvaged. I've also spoken with the Chilean Navy and reviewed their sonar data from the rescue operation." He paused, his gaze settling on Emily. "Most of my colleagues think you're suffering from some form of shared delusion brought on by the trauma of your shipwreck. But I'm not most of my colleagues." Emily felt a glimmer of hope. "You believe us?" Harrison smiled thinly. "Let's say I'm open to the possibility. The sonar readings from the rescue operation showed some anomalies. Large biological masses, moving in patterns that don't match known orca behavior. It's not proof, but it's enough to warrant further investigation." He leaned forward, his voice lowering conspiratorially. "I'm here to offer you a chance to go back. The ORI has a research vessel, the Horizon, equipped with the latest in marine biology tech. We can have you back in Antarctic waters within the week." The room erupted in a flurry of voices, excitement and apprehension mingling in equal measure. Emily raised a hand, silencing her team. "What's the catch, Dr. Harrison?" she asked, her eyes narrowing. "This kind of expedition doesn't come cheap, and it's not without risk. What does the Ori want in return?" Harrison's smile widened, showing a hint of teeth. "Smart woman. The catch, Dr. Chen, is that if we find what you claim is out there, the Ori gets exclusive rights to all discoveries, all data, all potential applications. Your team would be well compensated, of course, but the Institute would control the narrative." A heavy silence fell over the room. Emily could see the conflict on her teammates' faces. The chance to return, to prove their incredible story was tempting, but the strings attached. "We need time to discuss this," Emily said finally. Harrison nodded, standing smoothly. "Of course, you have 24 hours to decide. After that, the offer is off the table." He handed Emily a business card. "Call me when you've made your decision." As the door closed behind him, the room exploded into debate. "We can't trust him," Tom said immediately. "This has government black ops written all over it." "But it might be our only chance," Sarah countered. "Who else is going to believe us enough to fund another expedition?" Alexei remained silent, his brow furrowed in thought. Emily listened to her team argue, weighing the pros and cons in her mind. The scientist in her yearned for the chance to return, to unravel the mystery of the evolved orcas. But a nagging doubt gnawed at her. There was something in Harrison's eyes, a coldness that unsettled her. "Enough," she said finally, her voice cutting through the argument. "We need to approach this logically. Alexei, what's your take?" The Russian scientist was quiet for a moment before speaking. "The offer is convenient. Too convenient, perhaps. But Sarah is right. It may be our only chance to return and gather concrete evidence." Emily nodded, then turned to Tom. "You're our tech expert. If we do this, what kind of safeguards can we put in place? How do we protect our data? Ensure we have backups they can't access?" Tom's eyes lit up at the challenge. "Give me a few hours with the Horizon specs, and I can set up a shadow system. We'd have our own secure data storage, communications. They'd never know. That's illegal, Sarah pointed out. So is covering up first contact with an intelligent species, Tom shot back. Emily held up a hand, forestalling further argument. Here's what we're going to do. We accept Harrison's offer, but we go in with our eyes open. Tom, you set up whatever systems you need to protect our data. Sarah, I want you to discreetly reach out to your contacts in the scientific community. If things go south, we need allies who can vouch for us. She turned to Alexei. You and I will go over every inch of the horizon before we set sail. Any equipment we're not 100% sure about, we don't use. Her team nodded, determination replacing the uncertainty in their eyes. What about the orcas? Sarah asked softly. If we do make contact again. What then? Emily's expression softened. We do what we came to do in the first place. We study, we learn, we try to understand. But we do it on our terms, not the ORI's. As her team dispersed to begin preparations, Emily found herself alone in the hospital room. She moved to the window, looking out over the bustling port of Punta Arenas. Somewhere out there, beyond the horizon, the orcas were waiting. What would they find when they returned? Would the orcas welcome them or see them as a threat? And what of Harrison and the ORI? Emily couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking into something far more complex and dangerous than a simple research expedition. She closed her eyes, remembering the moment of connection she'd felt with the lead orca, the intelligence in its gaze, the clear attempt at communication. It was worth the risk. They had to go back. Opening her eyes, Emily reached for her phone and dialed the number on Harrison's card. Dr. Harrison, it's Emily Chen, we're in. There was a pause on the other end of the line, then Harrison's smooth voice came through. Excellent decision, Dr. Chen. I'll have my team begin preparations. Immediately. We'll be in touch with the details. As Emily hung up, she felt a mix of excitement and trepidation. They were committed now, for better or worse. Whatever lay ahead, whether breakthrough or disaster, there was no turning back. She turned, back to the window, her gaze drawn to the distant waters of the Southern Ocean. Somewhere out there, an intelligence beyond their understanding was waiting, and Emily Chen was determined to unravel its mysteries no matter the cost. The next few days passed in a whirlwind of activity. Despite the doctor's protests, Emily and her team checked out of the hospital, throwing themselves into preparations for the expedition. Harrison proved true to his word, providing them with access to the horizon and its advanced equipment. Tom spent hours hunched over computers, his fingers flying across keyboards as he set up their shadow systems. Sarah made discreet calls to colleagues around the world, building a network of trusted confidants who could act if things went wrong. Alexei pored over the ship's schematics and equipment manifests, his meticulous nature proving invaluable in identifying potential issues. Emily divided her time between overseeing her team's preparations and studying every scrap of data they had managed to salvage from their previous encounter. She replayed the recordings of the orca's vocalizations countless times, searching for patterns, for meaning in the complex harmonies. The night before they were set to depart, Emily found herself on the deck of the Horizon, staring out at the moonlit waters of the harbor. The weight of what they were about to undertake settled heavily on her shoulders. Trouble sleeping, Dr. Chen? Harrison's voice came from behind her. Emily turned, watching as the ORI representative approached. Just thinking about what lies ahead, she replied carefully. Harrison joined her at the railing, his eyes scanning the horizon. It's not too late to back out, you know. No one would blame you after what you've been through. Emily shook her head. That's not an option. We need answers. And if you don't like the answers you find? Harrison asked, his tone deceptively casual. Emily met his gaze steadily. The truth is the truth, Dr. Harrison. Our job is to uncover it, not judge it. A smile played at the corners of Harrison's mouth. Well said, Dr. Chen. I think this expedition is going to be very interesting indeed. As he walked away, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that she had just passed some sort of test. But to what end, she couldn't say. The next morning, as the first rays of sun painted the sky in hues of pink and gold, the Horizon slipped its moorings and set sail for the Southern Ocean. Standing on the bridge, watching the coast of Chile recede into the distance, Emily felt a surge of determination. Whatever challenges lay ahead, whatever secrets the orcas held, she and her team would face them together. The mysteries of the deep were calling, and Emily Chen was ready to answer. The horizon cut through the choppy waters of the Southern Ocean, its reinforced hull designed to withstand the harsh Antarctic conditions. Dr. Emily Chen stood on the bridge, her eyes fixed on the radar display. They had been at sea for a week, retracing their previous route, searching for any sign of the extraordinary orcas they had encountered. "Anything?" Tom asked, joining her at the console. His fingers twitched nervously, a habit he'd developed since their last encounter. Emily shook her head, frustration evident in her voice. "Nothing. It's like they've vanished. Or we imagined the whole thing," Tom muttered. But there was no real conviction in his words. "We didn't imagine it," Emily said firmly. "We all saw it, we all heard it, they're out there." The door to the bridge slid open and Dr. Harrison entered, his crisp appearance at odds with the rugged environment. "Any progress, Dr. Chen?" Emily turned to face him, carefully keeping her expression neutral. "Not yet, Dr. Harrison, but we're approaching the coordinates where we last encountered the pod." Harrison nodded, his eyes scanning the various displays. "And your team is prepared for contact, should it occur?" "As prepared as we can be," Emily replied. "Alexei has the hydrophones ready, Sarah's on standby with the cameras, and Tom's got our data systems locked down tight." A ghost of a smile played across Harrison's face. "Excellent. Keep me informed of any developments." As he left, Emily and Tom exchanged glances. "I don't trust him," Tom said in a low voice. "Neither do I," Emily admitted. "But for now, we need him. Just stay alert." The day wore on with no sign of the orcas. As the sun began to set, painting the icy waters in shades of orange and pink, Emily felt her hope beginning to falter. Had they come all this way for nothing? Suddenly, Alexei's voice crackled over the intercom. "Emily, you need to hear this." Emily and Tom raced to the acoustics lab where Alexei sat hunched over his equipment, headphones clamped to his ears. Sarah was already there, her face a mixture of excitement and apprehension. "What is it?" Emily demanded. Alexei held up a hand for silence, then flipped a switch. The room filled with a haunting, layered sound that sent shivers down Emily's spine. It was similar to the vocalizations they had heard before, but more complex, almost musical. "It's them," Sarah breathed. "It has to be." Emily nodded, her heart racing. "How far?" Alexei consulted his instruments. "Based on the signal strength, I'd estimate no more than 5 kilometers. But Emily, there's something else." He manipulated the controls, isolating a specific frequency. "Listen to this underlying pattern." As the team listened, their eyes widened in shock. Buried within the haunting melody was a series of clear, distinct pulses. "Is that?" Tom began. "Morse code," Emily finished. "They're sending us a message in Morse code." For a moment, the team stood in stunned silence, the implications of this development sinking in. Not only had the orcas returned, but they were actively attempting to communicate using a human method. "What does it say?" Sarah asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Alexei grabbed a notepad, his pen flying, across the paper as he translated the pulses. When he finished, he looked up, his face pale. "It says we await you at the gate." A heavy silence fell over the lab. Emily's mind raced, trying to make sense of the message. "The gate? What gate?" Before anyone could respond, the ship's alarms blared to life. Captain Rodriguez's voice came over the intercom, tight with tension. "All hands to stations. We have multiple large objects approaching rapidly from the port side." The team rushed to the nearest viewport, peering out into the gathering darkness. At first, they saw nothing but choppy waves and fragments of ice. Then, cutting through the water with impossible speed, came the distinctive dorsal fins of a pod of orcas. But these were unlike any orcas they had seen before. Even in the dim light, Emily could make out strange protrusions on their bodies, almost like armor, and their movements. They were too fast, too coordinated to be natural. "My God," Tom whispered. "What have they done to themselves?" As they watched, the lead orca breached, its massive body silhouetted against the darkening sky. For a brief moment, Emily could have sworn she saw a metallic glint where its eye should have been. The ship's radio crackled to life, and a voice that was at once familiar and alien filled the air. It was the same voice they had heard on the ice, but clearer now, more refined. "Humans," it said, the word a mixture of clicks and eerie, almost electronic tones. "You have returned as we knew you would. Are you prepared to see?" Emily grabbed the radio, her hand shaking slightly. "This is Dr. Emily Chen. We've come to learn, to understand. What is it you want to show us?" There was a pause, filled only with the sound of waves lapping against the ship's hull. Then, "The future. Your future, and ours. Follow." The pod of orcas wheeled in perfect unison, heading towards a massive iceberg looming in the distance. As the horizon cautiously followed, Emily felt a mixture of scientific excitement and primal fear. They were on the cusp of something monumental, she knew. But at what cost? "Dr. Chen," Harrison's voice came from behind them, making the team jump. He stood in the doorway, his usual composure slightly ruffled. "I trust you have an explanation for what's happening." Emily straightened, meeting his gaze steadily. "It appears, Dr. Harrison, that we're about to make history. The orcas have invited us to, well, I'm not exactly sure what, but we're going to find out." Harrison's eyes narrowed. "This is unprecedented. We should contact the mainland, get instructions." "No," Emily said firmly. "We're scientists. This is what we came for. We're going to see this through." For a moment it seemed Harrison might argue. Then he nodded, a strange light in his eyes. "Very well, Dr. Chen. Lead on." As the horizon approached the iceberg, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that they were crossing a threshold from which there was no return. The orcas led them through a narrow channel, the ice walls rising high on either side. And then, as they rounded a final bend, they saw it. Cut into the sheer face of the iceberg was an enormous, perfectly circular opening. Lights pulsed around its rim, casting an eerie blue glow over the water. "The gate," Sarah whispered. The orcas paused at the entrance, their bodies forming a living corridor, leading into the darkness beyond. The lead orca, the one with the metallic eye, surfaced near the ship. "Choose," its voice resonated through the air. "Enter and learn, or turn back and remain ignorant. But know this, the world is changing. You cannot stop what is coming. You can only adapt, or perish." Emily looked at her team, saw the mixture of fear and determination on their faces. Then she turned to Captain Rodriguez. "Take us in, Captain, slowly." As the horizon inched forward, passing between the silent sentinels of the orca pod, Emily felt a sense of vertigo. They were passing through a portal not just in ice, but in time. Whatever lay beyond would change their understanding of the world, forever. The last thing Emily saw before the darkness of the tunnel engulfed them was the gleam of the lead orca's mechanical eye. In that inhuman gaze, she saw intelligence, purpose, and something that might have been pity. Then they were through, the gate closing behind them with a sound like the end of the world, and in the eerie blue glow that surrounded them, Emily Chen and her team prepared to confront a future they could never have imagined. The horizon drifted through the cavernous tunnel, the eerie blue glow casting strange shadows on the faces of the crew. Dr. Emily Chen stood at the bow, her eyes wide as she tried to take in the impossible sight before her. The ice walls around them were smooth, almost polished, interspersed with what looked like advanced technology. Pulsing lights, strange antennae, and devices she couldn't begin to comprehend. "This can't be real," Tom muttered beside her, his face pale in the otherworldly light. "It's impossible." Emily shook her head, her scientific mind racing to make sense of what they were seeing. "We left impossible behind a long time ago, Tom. Whatever this is, it's very real." The ship's radio crackled to life, the now familiar blend of clicks and electronic tones filling the air. "Proceed to the central chamber. All will be explained." Captain Rodriguez looked to Emily for guidance. She nodded, her jaw set with determination. "Take us in, Captain. Slow and steady." As the horizon inched forward, the tunnel began to widen. Suddenly they emerged into a vast dome-shaped cavern that defied belief. The ceiling arched high above them, a perfect hemisphere of ice that seemed to glow from within. but it was what floated in the center of the chamber that drew everyone's attention. A massive structure, part organic, part mechanical, hovered above the water. It pulsed with an inner light, tendrils of energy arcing between various points on its surface, and surrounding it, moving with precise coordinated motions, were dozens of orcas. But these were not the orcas they had seen before. These creatures were clearly altered, their bodies a seamless blend of flesh and machine. Some had mechanical, fins that propelled them through the water with impossible speed. Others sported what looked like advanced sensor arrays where their eyes should be. "My God," Sarah breathed, her camera clicking rapidly as she tried to document everything. "They've evolved, or been modified. This is beyond anything we could have imagined." Dr. Harrison stepped forward, his usual composure shaken. "What is this place? What have you done to yourselves?" The lead orca, the one with the metallic eye, surfaced near the ship. When it spoke, its voice seemed to come from everywhere at once. "This is the future, humans. Your future and ours. We have transcended the limitations of our biology, merged with the technology you so carelessly discard into our oceans." Emily leaned over the railing, her scientific curiosity overriding her fear. How? How is this possible? The orca's mechanical eye whirred as it focused on her. "Your kind has polluted the seas for centuries. Plastics, heavy metals, discarded technology. It was killing us, so we adapted. We evolved. At first it was simple, incorporating the toxins into our bodies, using them instead of being poisoned by them. But then we found your lost machines, your sunken ships and submarines. We learned. We grew." Alexei stepped forward, his voice filled with awe. "You've achieved a form of techno-organic fusion. It's incredible. It was necessary." The orca replied. "The oceans are changing, warming, acidifying. The old ways of survival were no longer enough. We had to transcend, to become more than what we were." Emily's mind raced with the implications. "But why reveal yourselves to us now? Why bring us here?" The orca was silent for a moment, and when it spoke again, there was a gravity to its tone that sent chills down Emily's spine. "Because the time of change is upon us all. The world you knew is ending, humans. The seas are rising, the climate shifting. Your civilizations teeter on the brink of collapse." It gestured with a mechanical fin towards the pulsing structure at the center of the chamber. "This is our ark, our means of survival in the world to come. And now, you must choose." "Choose what?" Tom asked, his voice tight with tension. "Whether to join us in adaptation or cling to your doomed way of life," the orca replied. "We offer you a chance to evolve, to merge with the technology you created and survive the coming storms. Or you can leave, return to your world and face extinction." A heavy silence fell over the ship. Emily looked at her team, saw the mixture of fear, awe, and uncertainty on their faces. Then she turned to Dr. Harrison, whose expression was unreadable. "You knew," she said, realization dawning. "The ORI, the convenient rescue, this expedition, you knew about this." Harrison nodded slowly. "We suspected. There have been incidents, sightings. We needed confirmation, and you and your team provided the perfect cover for our investigation." Anger flared in Emily's chest. "You used us, put us in danger without our knowledge. For the greater good, Dr. Chen," Harrison replied, his voice hard. "Look around you. This is the most significant discovery in human history. The potential benefits of this technology are not ours to take." Emily cut him off. She turned back to the orca. "You said, we have to choose. What exactly are you offering?" The orca's mechanical eye whirred again. "Integration, evolution, the chance to become something more than human, to survive and thrive in the world that is coming. But know this, it is not a choice to be made lightly. Those who join us must leave their old lives behind. There is no going back." Emily felt the weight of the moment pressing down on her. This was more than a scientific discovery. It was a crossroads for humanity itself. She looked at her team, saw the questions in their eyes. "What about the rest of humanity?" Sarah asked. "Are you offering this choice to everyone?" The orca's voice took on a somber tone. We cannot save everyone. The process of integration is complex, resource-intensive. We offer it to you as representatives of your species. If you choose to join us, you will help us refine the process, perhaps find ways to extend it to others. But time is short. The great changes are already underway. Tom stepped forward, his face a mask of determination. I'll do it. This technology, this evolution, it's the only way forward. We can't turn our backs on this opportunity. Sarah nodded, though her voice shook slightly. I agree. The knowledge we could gain, the advancements we could make, it's worth the risk. Alexei remained silent, his eyes darting between his colleagues and the orcas. Emily felt torn. The scientist in her yearned to embrace this new frontier, to be at the forefront of this evolutionary leap. But another part of her recoiled at the idea of leaving her humanity behind. How long do we have to decide? She asked. The process must begin soon. The orca replied. The changes in the ocean's chemistry are accelerating. We estimate no more than 3 days before we must seal ourselves away to weather the coming storms. Emily nodded, her mind racing. We need time to discuss this, to understand exactly what we're being offered. The orca dipped its head in what might have been a nod. You may remain here while you decide. Observe, learn, but do not attempt to leave or interfere with our work. The choice, when made, must be final. As the orca swam away, rejoining its pod around the central structure, Emily turned to her team. We need to talk. All of us, including you, Dr. Harrison. No more secrets. Harrison nodded, his expression grave. Agreed. But Dr. Chen, consider carefully what's at stake here. This could be the salvation of our species. Emily looked out over the otherworldly scene before them. The merged orcas, the pulsing technological heart of their sanctuary. She felt the weight of history pressing down on her shoulders. It could also be the end of everything that makes us human, she said softly. Whatever we decide, nothing will ever be the same. As the horizon drifted in the alien blue glow of the ice cavern, Emily Chen and her team prepared to make a decision that would shape the future of humanity. The clock was ticking, the old world dying outside. And in this hidden realm beneath, the ice. The next stage of evolution awaited their choice. The soft hum of advanced machinery permeated the air as Dr. Emily Chen paced the length of the horizon's main lab. Her team sat around a large table, their faces a mixture of exhaustion and nervous energy. They had spent the last 2 days observing the orca's incredible underwater civilization, their minds reeling from the implications of what they had discovered. All right, Emily said, her voice cutting through the tense silence. We need to make a decision. Time is running out. Tom leaned forward, his eyes bright with excitement. I still say we do it. The technology they're offering, and it's beyond anything we could achieve on our own. Think of the possibilities. Sarah nodded hesitantly. The potential for scientific advancement is enormous. We could unlock secrets of the ocean we've never dreamed of. Alexei, who had been uncharacteristically quiet since their arrival, finally spoke up. But at what cost? We're talking about fundamentally changing what it means to be human. Are we ready for that responsibility? Emily turned to Dr. Harrison, who stood by the window, gazing out at the bioluminescent orcas gliding past. What about you, Dr. Harrison? What does the ORI really want from all this? Harrison turned, his face impassive. The ORI's goal has always been the advancement of human knowledge and capabilities. He gestured to the alien world outside. This is the ultimate advancement. But you're not planning on joining them yourself, are you? Emily pressed, her eyes narrowing. A flicker of something, guilt, fear, passed across Harrison's face. My role is to ensure that whatever knowledge we gain here makes it back to the surface. Someone has to tell the world what's coming. Emily shook her head, frustration evident in her voice. And who gave you the right to make that decision? For all of humanity? This isn't just about scientific discovery anymore. We're talking about the future of our entire species. The room fell silent as the weight of her words sank in. Outside, an orca with cybernetic fins glided past the window, its mechanical eye gleaming in the ethereal light. Sarah broke the silence, her voice barely above a whisper. What if What if we're looking at this all wrong? What if this isn't an opportunity but a warning? All eyes turned to her as she continued, gaining confidence. Think about it. These orcas didn't choose to evolve this way. They were forced to adapt because of our actions, our pollution, our disregard for the oceans. What if by showing us this, they're trying to shock us into changing our ways before it's too late? Tom scoffed. That's a bit of a stretch, don't you think? They literally invited us to join them. Did they? Alexei interjected, his brow furrowed in thought. Or did they present us with a false choice? Join them or face extinction? But what if there's a third option they're not telling us about? Emily felt a spark of hope ignite in her chest. You mean find a way to prevent this future from happening in the first place? Alexei nodded. Exactly. We have knowledge now that no one else on Earth has. We've seen the consequences of our actions firsthand. What if our real responsibility is to go back and use this knowledge to change things? Dr. Harrison shook his head. It's too late for that. The changes they spoke of are already underway. We can't stop what's coming. Maybe not entirely, Emily said, her mind racing. But we could mitigate it, prepare for it, find ways to adapt that don't involve giving up our humanity. The room buzzed with renewed energy as the team debated the possibilities. Ideas flew back and forth. Advanced ocean cleanup technologies, sustainable fishing practices, new methods of carbon sequestration. As the discussion reached a fever pitch, a low, resonant tone filled the air. The team fell silent, recognizing the sound of the lead orca attempting to communicate. Humans. The voice reverberated through the ship. Your time for decision has come. What is your choice? Emily took a deep breath, looking at each member of her team in turn. She saw determination in their eyes, a unified purpose that hadn't been there before. With a nod, she moved to the ship's communication panel. We've made our decision, she said, her voice steady. But first, we have questions. There was a pause. Then, speak. Emily steeled herself. You've shown us a possible future, one where the oceans have become uninhabitable for unmodified life. But is it the only possible future? Is there no way to prevent this outcome? The silence that followed seemed to stretch for an eternity. When the orca finally responded, there was a note of surprise in its artificial voice. You seek an alternative? We did not anticipate this response. We're scientists, Emily pressed. Our job is to find solutions, not just accept the outcomes we're presented with. Is there a way to heal the oceans, to reverse the damage we've done? Another long pause. The task would be immense. The changes are deeply rooted, the damage extensive, but perhaps not impossible. Emily felt a surge of hope. Then that's our choice. We choose to fight for a future where humanity and nature can coexist, where we don't have to sacrifice our essence to survive. The orca's voice took on a curious tone. You would reject our offer of evolution? Of guaranteed survival? We choose to evolve in our own way, Emily responded. To use our minds, our technology to solve the problems we've created. We can learn from you, from what you've achieved, but we need to find our own path forward. The lab fell silent as they awaited the orca's response. Minutes ticked by, feeling like hours. Finally, the voice returned, filled with a complexity of emotion that seemed almost human. Your choice is unexpected, but not without merit. Perhaps we have underestimated your kind's capacity for change. Emily leaned forward, her heart pounding. Does this mean you'll help us? Share your knowledge so we can find a way to save the oceans without resorting to such extreme measures. We will consider it, the orca replied. Your perspective has given us much to contemplate. Return to your world. Prepare your people for the changes to come. If you can prove that humanity is capable of the transformation you speak of, we may yet find a way to coexist. As the voice faded, the team looked at each other in stunned silence. It wasn't the outcome any of them had expected, but it filled them with a renewed sense of purpose. Dr. Harrison was the first to speak. You realize what this means? The responsibility we now carry? Emily nodded, her mind already racing with the challenges ahead. We have to convince the world of what we've seen, what we've learned, and we have to do it quickly. "It won't be easy," Sarah said. "People will think we're crazy, and even if they believe us changing course on a global scale." "We have to try," Emily interrupted. "It's not just our future at stake anymore. It's the future of every species on this planet." As the Horizon began its journey back through the icy tunnel, leaving the orca's hidden world behind, Emily felt a mix of trepidation and determination. They were returning to a world that had no idea how close it was to the brink, carrying knowledge that could either save humanity or tear it apart. The ship emerged from the ice gate, the familiar expanse of the Southern Ocean stretching out before them. As the gate closed behind them, sealing away the wonders and horrors they had witnessed, Emily made a silent vow. They would find a way to save the oceans, to chart a new course for humanity. The orcas had shown them a possible future. Now it was up to them to create a better one. As the Horizon set course for home, the weight of their newfound responsibility settled over the team. They had glimpsed the future and rejected it, choosing instead to fight for a world where man and nature could find harmony. The real work, they knew, was just beginning. The fluorescent lights of the United Nations conference room buzzed overhead, their harsh glare reflecting off the polished table where Dr. Emily Chen sat, her hands clasped tightly together. The room was packed with scientists, politicians, and media representatives from around the world, all gathered to hear the findings of the now infamous Antarctic Orca expedition. Emily glanced at her team, seated beside her. Tom fidgeted nervously with his pen, while Sarah stared straight ahead, her face a mask of determination. Alexei sat perfectly still, his eyes scanning the crowd. Dr. Harrison, representing the Oceanic Research Institute, sat at the far end of the table, his expression unreadable. As the murmur of voices died down, the UN Secretary General stepped up to the podium. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are here today to discuss what may be the most significant scientific discovery of our time. Dr. Emily Chen and her team claim to have encountered an advanced civilization of genetically and technologically modified orcas in the waters of Antarctica. Dr. Chen, the floor is yours." Emily stood, acutely aware of the skeptical gazes fixed upon her. She took a deep breath and began. "Thank you, Mr. Secretary General. What I'm about to share with you will sound impossible, even insane. But I assure you, every word is true." For the next hour, Emily laid out their incredible story. She described the initial attack on the Aurora, their rescue and subsequent return to the Antarctic, and their encounter with the evolved orcas. As she spoke, images and video footage played on the large screens behind her, showing glimpses of the underwater civilization they had witnessed. "These orcas have adapted to survive in an ocean that we are rapidly destroying," Emily continued, her voice growing more passionate. "They've merged with our discarded technology, evolving into something beyond our current understanding. And they've shown us a possible future. A future where the oceans become uninhabitable for unmodified life." A ripple of unease passed through the audience. Emily pressed on. "But this future is not inevitable. The orcas gave us a choice. Join them in their evolution or face extinction. We chose a third option. To fight for a future where humanity and nature can coexist, where we use our knowledge and technology not to exploit, but to heal the damage we've done." As Emily concluded her presentation, the room erupted into chaos. Voices shouted over one another, demanding explanations, proof, action. The Secretary General called for order, then turned to the panel of expert scientists who had been assembled to evaluate the expedition's findings. "Dr. Yamamoto, as head of the review panel, what is your assessment of Dr. Chen's claims?" Dr. Yamamoto, a stern-faced oceanographer, leaned into his microphone. "While Dr. Chen's story is extraordinary, the evidence she and her team have provided is compelling. The video footage, audio recordings, and biological samples all point to something far beyond our current scientific understanding. We cannot dismiss their claims outright." A murmur ran through the crowd. Emily felt a glimmer of hope. "However," Dr. Yamamoto continued, "we must approach this with caution. The implications of Dr. Chen's discovery, if true, are staggering. We need more research, more data before we can verify." "We don't have time for more research," Tom interjected, jumping to his feet. "The oceans are dying now. These orcas, they've adapted because they had to. If we don't act soon, we'll be faced with the same choice they were. The Secretary General frowned. Dr. Chen, is this true? How urgent is this situation? Emily stood again, her voice steady. Based on the data we gathered and the information provided by the orcas, we estimate we have less than a decade to make significant changes before the damage to our oceans becomes irreversible. The room fell silent as the weight of her words sank in. Then a voice from the back of the room cut through the tension. This is preposterous. Everyone turned to see Dr. Victor Novak, a prominent climate change denier, on his feet. Talking orcas? Underwater civilizations? This is science fiction, not fact. Dr. Chen and her team are either delusional or perpetrating a massive hoax. Angry voices rose in agreement and opposition. The Secretary General called for order, but the room had descended into chaos. Amidst the uproar, Emily felt a touch on her arm. She turned to see Sarah, her eyes blazing with determination. We knew this would happen, Sarah said quietly. We have to make them understand. Show them. Emily nodded, then stepped forward, raising her voice above the din. Ladies and gentlemen, please. I understand your skepticism. What we're claiming defies belief. But the evidence is real, and the threat is immediate. We don't have the luxury of doubt. She gestured to Alexei, who nodded and pressed a button on his laptop. The lights in the room dimmed, and a new image appeared on the screens. This, Emily said, her voice cutting through the silence, is a real-time satellite image of the Antarctic coast where we encountered the Orca civilization. The image showed a vast stretch of ice, unremarkable at first glance. Then slowly, a pattern began to emerge. Beneath the ice, visible only through the most advanced imaging technology, was a network of structures and energy signatures that pulsed with an alien rhythm. We've been monitoring this area since our return, Emily explained. What you're seeing is the edge of the Orca's domain. It's growing, adapting, preparing for a future we can barely imagine. The room was silent. Now all eyes fixed on the impossible image before them. We stand at a crossroads, Emily continued, her voice resonating with conviction. We can choose to ignore this, to continue on our current path of destruction, or we can choose to change, to work towards a future where we coexist with the oceans and all its inhabitants instead of exploiting them to the point of collapse. She turned to face the assembly, her gaze sweeping across scientists, politicians, and skeptics alike. The orcas have shown us what awaits us if we fail, but they've also given us a chance to prove that humanity is capable of change, of growth, of true evolution, not by altering our bodies, but by transforming our relationship with the world around us. Emily paused, letting her words sink in. We need a global effort, unprecedented in human history. We need to clean our oceans, revolutionize our industries, rethink our entire approach to the environment. It won't be easy. It will require sacrifice, innovation, and cooperation on a scale we've never seen before. But the alternative? She gestured to the pulsing image of the Orca civilization. The alternative is to surrender our future to the depths. As Emily's words faded, the room remained silent. Then, slowly, a sound began to build. It started as a few scattered claps, then grew, swelling into a thunderous applause that filled the chamber. The Secretary General stepped forward, his face grave but determined. Dr. Chen, your discovery has shaken the foundations of our understanding, but it has also given us a clear mission. I propose an immediate formation of a global task force with you and your team at its head to address this crisis. Emily nodded, feeling the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders. As the room buzzed with renewed energy, plans already being formed and alliances forged, she turned to her team. This is just the beginning, she said softly. The real work starts now. Tom grinned, his earlier nervousness replaced with determination. Saving the world from talking cyber orcas? Just another day at the office, right? Sarah laughed, the tension of the past weeks finally breaking. I can't wait to see how we write this up for the scientific journals. Alexei simply nodded, a rare smile crossing his face. We have much to do and little time, but together perhaps we can create the future we choose, not the one we fear. As the team huddled together, already beginning to plan their next steps, Emily cast one last glance at the image of the Orca civilization pulsing on the screen. They had been given a glimpse of a possible future, a warning of what might come. Now, it was up to them to chart a different course. The challenge ahead was immense, the odds stacked against them. But as Emily looked at her team, at the determined faces of those in the room, she felt a spark of hope. They had seen the impossible, and they had chosen to fight for a better future. Whatever came next, they would face it together, armed with knowledge, driven by purpose, and guided by the belief that humanity, when pushed to the brink, was capable of extraordinary things. The future of the oceans, of the planet, of humanity, itself hung in the balance, and the real work, Emily knew, was just beginning.